What are the first steps of a project process? Project selection, deciding what interest to pursue in a project, bid/being approached, first steps to get an initial idea.
Right. Every project that I do is quite different, so it demands like a different gestation period. Sometimes I get asked to do commissions, such as the Magic Lantern I did with the V&A, or the Nerve-Rack Mask of Views at Queen's House, this Equinox project that I'm doing in Dubai. And those things come with like some kind of criteria. Either they've got a theme or they've got a building, so you have to fit within that. So that is quite a different problem to just coming up with an idea for an exhibition, which could be anything. But generally, I'm just looking anyway. So anything, a book I might have read, podcasts I've listened to, stuff that I'm looking at online, films that I've seen, conversations that I've had. All these are potential ingredients for an artwork that I might potentially make in the future. And I'm storing all those up in little notes and folders full of images and clips. And then if a project comes up that has a brief to it, such as the Expo 2020 in Dubai, I'll then try and find out something that I've had an interest in before and see how I can work that into the idea. At the same time as building this archive of different subject matter that I'm interested in, I'm also logging anything that interests me, like technically, so formal solutions to making an artwork or an installation, something new that I've seen that has like kind of suddenly become available because of some advance in technology, which makes it affordable and easy enough for somebody like me to deal with. And then it's a case of just trying to put those things together. So trying to find some kind of synergy between the form and the content, so a way of presenting the artwork formally in a way that engages with the theme that I'm trying to deal with. And I'm also trying to integrate various themes. So it's very rare that I'll have just one idea and say, this is what I want to make a work about. Just like, okay, so I've got this idea, and if I incorporate something from this idea that I've been developing here, then we can have a work that's more than about just one thing. It can relate to multiple different areas. So it's like a slow process of honing it and trying to find a way that makes it work, so that once it's in an exhibition space, it functions of something that seems like it was, seems like it's already been made, or seems like it's totally resolved in some way, but it's actually a process that can go on for months or years, honing it until it becomes that thing.
Yeah, it's built up from all these different influences and ideas, and then you pick them and take them into different projects.
Yes.
Do you think there is an overarching theme throughout all your work? If so, is this constructive or just a natural thematic interest? I spoke about it a little bit there recently. Anything you'd like to add?
Looking back, I think there are themes throughout the work that I've done, but I don't really have like a conscious strategy of dealing with it. I kind of let my subconscious dictate where my interests take me, and I'm going to be interested in things that I'm interested in, and they're interesting to me for a reason which I assume is pertinent. And I think it's a better way, a healthier way to pursue ideas, rather than trying to force myself to be interested in a particular area that I'm not particularly interested in. If I engage with something like kind of naturally, then there's likely to be a good motivation for that interest. So then I'm definitely interested, and I can read a lot of books on it. If it's something I'm not so interested in, it becomes a bit of a slog. So I just gravitate towards those things that interest me, and don't try to put a program on it. But then obviously there's like a system that I have to introduce for contextualizing all of those little thoughts and ideas and reference material that I've accumulated. And then I try to put a structure around it, but I let the impulses take me where they will.
Does it happen often that you have to take something up that you're not particularly interested in? I just think you have quite a lot of freedom now to turn things down?
Well, I mean, one of the curses of being an artist is that, you know, you can make a work about anything you want. You can let it take you wherever. So it's like, what is it that you're interested in? And I think, like, as a young artist, that'd be quite challenging. It's like, well, what is it that I'm interested in? And sometimes you try to be interested in things that you're not interested in because you're supposed to be interested in these particular fields, but it doesn't really kind of chime with you and where you're coming from. And it can take a while before you gravitate towards those things that really like hold your attention.
Did it take you a long time?
Well, I think I was like pretty engaged early on. I knew that this was what I wanted, but then you experience certain obstacles along the way. So a particular furrow that you happen to be working might then suddenly become populated by a lot of other artists who are working in that same furrow. And do you want to be kind of lumped in with this particular line of experimentation? And sometimes I didn't, so I chose to move into a different area which I found more challenging, because if everybody's doing something, generally it's become quite acceptable. So what's the point of doing it? Are you doing it just because it's something that's acceptable to do? Well, that seems like a bit of an easy option, so it's something I tend to avoid.
What are the factors in deciding scale and method of working? Do you often dictate it, or do you change it for the audience, or the evolving technological world?
So if you're talking about the actual physical scale of an artwork or an installation, it's kind of dictated by the artwork and the idea behind it. But it's a very tough question. Getting it right, getting a scale of something right can totally make or break an artwork. So it's like a key part of it, as is like the kind of the material that it's built from, the color it is, the way it's lit. All of those ingredients inform the way that you look at, interpret, and engage with the artwork. That was the post, still coming.
There we go.
So scale is one of those things that can dramatically change the way that you engage with it. And you walk into a room and you see something that's huge, it's quite overwhelming. You confronted it in a very different way that if you're seeing something that's tiny that you have to approach and get down to and really examine before you can fully comprehend what you're looking at. So yeah, scale is like a key factor in determining how this thing appears when you put it in an exhibition space. And some things I find can function better when they're smaller than when they're medium or a larger size. But generally it's predetermined pretty on in the kind of the early stages of making the artwork. I know whether it's going to be a large scale thing or it's going to be something that's a much more modest scale.
You know how things change.
Scale-wise.
Control where you imagined it as either a really large scale thing or a small scale thing, and people come back and been like, we can't facilitate that in either way. Does that happen that often? If ever.
It possibly has. I can't think of anything where I've really shifted the scale at like a later stage in the game. But I know when I was making like right from a little in 1988 when I made this work, A Bullet Hole, it's quite an expensive work to make because I had to print this huge billboard size photograph, and then for the framing I got a friend who got these free frames from a gallery that were throwing some out. So we got all these frames which are old Gilbert and George frames, and I laid them out on the floor. There's like 15 of them, and it kind of looked okay, but it just wasn't big enough. It wasn't like in proportion to your body, it didn't overwhelm you in its scale. I thought if it's just like kind of a third as big again as this, that's the kind of size that I'm looking at, so that when you're standing in front of it on the wall, you can be totally enveloped by the scale of this thing. And that was a difficult choice to make because I had free frames in front of me. I could have popped them in, hung them on the wall, and that would have been good. But I chose to go a third bigger, which meant I had to make them all myself because I didn't have the money to fabricate them. And then I decided that they should be backlit light boxes, which means that I had to build these slightly larger light boxes, which then had light fittings in, and then like acrylic, two pieces of acrylic to hold the photograph in front of the bulb. So suddenly it became quite a huge operation, but I knew it just should be that much bigger, 30% bigger, just to make it the scale which I kind of did justice to that particular artwork.
What about for the technology because that's one thing that can be applied either in a really small setting or quite a large setting.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know the extent to which your work's going to be applied in the technological world? For example, with the VR projects, you know that within reason they're going to be the people in the room, or however many headsets you've got. But there is obviously the potential to be able to apply that globally.
Right, yeah.
Do you design for that, or do you? Yeah, what happens there with you?
Yeah, okay, so there's other issues to scale, which is more than just the physical size of something, which is the reach of it and how many people you can actually get it out to. And the first VR project I made was 6 people in a headset in a room at any one time, which was quite ambitious in 2017. But since I've been developing a couple of projects which are going to be online only, so it's just a virtual experience. And I will have live actors inside this, so you've got somebody in a motion capture shoot in a head rig, so that when you go into the experience, either in your headset at home or a desktop or a little handset, you can communicate with somebody who's inside my experience, who's portrayed by a live avatar. You can speak to them, they can understand you and speak back to you. So this is like a kind of a bit of an innovation for me to have these live actors in and to have an interactive element to the experience. But it means that I can scale up a lot more effectively than I could in a physical space with actual hardware that I've got to get onboarding and offboarding viewers as they're coming through. So I've got like a system where I have 10 people, audience members coming in virtually with one live actor in the motion capture suit. Then if I have 11 people or I have 20 people, I have to have 2 actors to cover that scenario. But the reach is potentially like global. Anybody in the world can access this at any time. As long as I've got enough actors on standby, that I can scale up 1 actor for every 10 audience member in the experience.
Because with sort of like online virtual reality stuff, it obviously makes it a lot more accessible. You know, your artwork can then be kind of experienced by a lot more people than if it was just in one room in London or one room in Dubai or something. But do you think that it loses that tangible aspect that art has always had? Like, do you ever wrestle with that problem that it's not something physical there? Is that ever been an issue for you?
Yeah, and I think you can get wedded to a lot of practices that you think are indispensable and that you can't live without. And for me, it's always been quite important to have something tangible, something tactile. So generally when I've made a video artwork, for example, I don't like to just show it on a Samsung or a Sony screen on the wall where you've got a little brand logo on there, on a bracket, because the bezel on that and the way it's hung on the wall is all informing the way people read content of the video. So the works that I make, I try to build like a frame or a casing around that thing, so you experience it in the way that you would any other artwork, that the actual kind of presentation of it, the way that it's joined to the wall, is all part of that artwork. And likewise with projections, I do various things such as project them onto certain materials that I've chosen, so it's not just a rectangular projection onto a wall. So that like real physical tactile experience has been quite important to me. And my first VR project was a room scale experience where you walk around and everything you can see you can also touch. There's an equivalent in the real world, and the virtual world and the real world is synchronized, so those things like kind of complement each other, and it's a very strange, convincing experience when you have that synergy between the various elements of perception. But with the new projects that I'm doing that are totally virtual, it's like a sacrifice you have to make. And once I'd kind of accepted that this is a route I was going down to, then it opens up other worlds of possibilities. So I kind of regret losing that tangible element. But at the same time, I've got sculptures and paintings and various other things that I can put in exhibition spaces. It's not as if I'm like cutting loose and going totally virtual. But there are other worlds out there to be explored. So, the question comes down to, okay, are you going to be like totally married to this one way of producing the work that has a tangible quality to it, or can you do that and then also explore other realms, which are, these completely virtual realms? And I'm quite interested to see where this could go. And it's quite important with the new ones that I'm making that we will be doing all the processing on the cloud, so you don't need high-end computers. Like with my first Thresholds VR, they were pretty good computers with good graphic cards in a backpack PC, feeding all the content through to the headset. Now with these new iterations, it's going to be something that anybody can do, whatever their kind of quality of their device is. So we hope it to be like a lot more democratic, because anybody can reach it anytime and you don't need any particular processing power on your computer.
What's your take on NFTs as kind of, they're almost a digital version of a physical artwork, a standalone artwork, instead of an experience or a video, obviously it can be video, but it's almost taking the physical and just transplanting it into the virtual world. What's your take on that? Do you reckon it's a beneficial move, or do you think it's a gimmick?
I mean, it appears to be the perfect solution for any kind of video-based material, whether that's like generated in like a 3D software or whatever. It's a way of distributing it which is seamless with the medium that it was created in. And it is slightly problematic to make an artwork that is digital and will then be presented on a digital screen and hung on a wall in a gallery. And then suddenly you go around an exhibition and one of the screens is gone, so you've just got static or something, or like kind of no content, whatever. Or the screen goes down a couple of years after you've kind of exhibited it and maybe sold it, so you get somebody calling up saying this work that I bought in 2013 is no longer functioning and that particular screen can't be replaced because it's now been upgraded by another screen. So you have a problem of trying to resolve these issues, which are kind of a little superfluous and like not actually crucial to the video itself. They're kind of complex issues which are boring to deal with. So the idea that this content can exist only online and can be bought and traded online as these digital files which you have an authentication to seems like a kind of a natural home for them. I've not really got into exploring it myself, but I'm kind of interested in it as a media.
Do you feel a responsibility to anything/anyone other than your personal interests?
I think my personal interests involve certain responsibilities, so I don't feel that I have a responsibility to others in the work that I make, but my interests might dictate that I have those responsibilities anyway. But I think that is, I think it's an important point that you shouldn't stretch yourself to the point of acting responsibly if you don't feel the motivation for doing that. I think it should come from something deeper, that you feel motivated to behave in a certain way and make work about certain things because it's meaningful to you, rather than feeling obliged to it and making those decisions and demonstrating your virtue just for the sake of letting other people know that that's the kind of character you are. And I try not to make work that's a bit more ambiguous than that anyway, that like engages people in a little bit of a kind of a conundrum or a little a problematic, like a kind of a moral question, so that the viewer, when they see an artwork, becomes complicit in this thing that they're kind of engaged in, and then a question's thrown back on them over whether this thing that I've made is a worthy or worthwhile undertaking in the first place. So I try to avoid making work that is rhetorical or dogmatic or asserting certain principles. I try to make the artwork a question rather than an answer.
Do you think there's a fine line between like ambiguity and kind of making things accessible? And I think if something's too ambiguous and too kind of personal to you, it can often alienate people, do you think? Within art, I think a lot of sort of art people will look at, and because it's quite personal to the artist, they don't feel a connection to it. Do you think that's the...
I think it's very important that the work that you make, certainly the work that I make, I try to make something that is clear, concise and simple as possible. So all of those like nebulous ideas that I have floating around, I try to hone it down into something that is extremely easy to digest at first experience. So you see something that you can understand. It's probably even something that you're kind of familiar with in a certain way. And then within that, there are layers of things that you can tease out of it if you can be bothered to spend the time with it. So I think like if you're dealing with like complex issues or layers of different issues, then I think it probably helps if you can present it in a way that's clear, so that people at least don't feel that insecurity and uncertainty that they're totally lost when they first experience it. I try to make things that are engaging from the first second that you see it, and then that there's more to be revealed later, ideally, hopefully.
With projects like Echolocation, Upcoming Terror and Insecticide series, there seems to be an ecological theme you've returned to. Does the ecological/climate crisis influence this, or are they a form of commentary on this? Is that kind of...
If that's boring, don't know.
I think it's just something about climate crisis.
We can
I can understand. I'll answer it briefly anyway.
Yeah.
The work I made for Expo 2020 in Dubai, which is this large lotus flower, and inside it are the stamen of the flower, and then on those stamen I've used it for the architecture for insects pollinating and fluttering around and catching their lunch, etc. So it's this little ecosystem that I built, this very delicately calibrated ecosystem, which is the world out there of insects that is currently, the insects are in decline. If they continue at the pace they are now, we're going to be in deep trouble. Very important for the ecology of the planet. So it was very interesting for me to make a work about that anyway. But the pavilion where the work is situated is the sustainability pavilion. So it helped if I made something that addressed that issue. So I chose this particular issue with insect decline. Because it was in kind of one of my folders anyway, I was thinking that this is something that's potentially so catastrophic, I should try and make something about it. And previously I've had quite a few insects in my work, moths and daddy long-legged spiders that I've crushed and then blown up, and these tiny little finite creatures become, it's like there's whole universes within inside the crushed thorax and the broken like crushed velvet wings that they've got. Suddenly they become like awe-inspiring to see, but not something that's immediately apparent when you see a tiny little insect. And since like 25, 30 years ago, I've been making artworks with like a kind of a little canary inside a bell jar, which was like a recreation of an experiment with a vacuum pump to see if we needed oxygen to breathe. So they put a little canary in a bell jar and then extract all the air and watch it die. Just like this little conundrum of watching this thing die, but it is done for like a greater scientific knowledge. But exterminating this little canary, is that the right thing to be doing? And then other like psychological experiments, such as the ones by Harlow and Harlow, where they took little baby monkeys and put them in cages with simulated monkey mothers wearing terry towel or not terry towel, just basically behavioral experiments on little animals. But there's like a sadness and a pathos to these experiments. So I've been using these elements in my work for a long time anyway.
Yeah, that's
Is there something? Oh,
Like these here.
right. Okay. Yeah. These things. Pigeons. Yeah. Yes. Exactly. Yeah. Got to reference them. Yeah. Right.
Do you consider your contemporaries to still be the other YVA members, or do you think that this could potentially hinder and stagnate your reputation and the sort of progression of your practice?
I think when you're young, and certainly like when I was at art school, that grouping of people that you're with is very important, and there's like a chemistry that goes on between all of you because there's this cross-pollination of different ideas and working with different materials, and that can be very rich territory to be working in. And then immediately in those post-art school years when people are starting to exhibit, galleries in this country and internationally, you're checking out what they're doing, and there's kind of a bit of a healthy competition between what people have done, the ambition of what they've done, and the profundity, the greatness, the silliness, the funniness of all those things. They're all kind of ingredients which you try to keep an eye on and you know, try and raise your game so that you're making something that's on an equal level. But I think that falls off after a while, after, you know, years and years of doing it, because when you're younger, you're finding your own voice, so you're trying different hats on, and you're thinking, well, is this what I want to do? Maybe I'll try a little bit of that. So there's quite a bit of maneuvering, but then I think by the time you've been doing it for 10, 15, 20 years, you know, you've got, you know, your particular way of doing things, and I think that interest in other people's work falls off a little bit inevitably. I still go to these shows, and last weekend I was in Suffolk, an exhibition of Sarah Lucas, Don Brown, Gary Hume, etc. I was at Goldsmiths, but yeah. So I still see those people and still see their work and still like kind of love seeing what they're up to, but its relevance to what you're doing becomes less, I think, because you're now just on your mission for what you do. And for me, there's so many different aspects to the work that I make, from animatronics to virtual reality to oil painting, photographs. So, you know, I'm doing my best to keep up with what I'm doing. There's quite enough to be going on. I don't really need too much outside influence creeping in. So I think, for me anyway, that's the way it pans out over the years.